Thank you for listening to this download of Start the Week, presented by Tom Sutcliffe.
Hello. Italy's in crisis this morning, still without a government 2 months after the general election, and with the populist leader of the Five Star Movement, Beppe Grillo, calling on his supporters to oppose the re-election of President Napolitano. Then again, how long has it been since Italy wasn't in some kind of crisis? On the programme today, 4 guests who love the country to talk about its exasperating combination of virtue and vice. Annalisa Pyrrhus's documentary, Girlfriend in a Coma, is explicitly intended as a wake-up call, alerting anyone who cares to just how critical the country's condition now is. The British writer Tim Parks, who's lived in Italy for years, takes to the rails to get at the national character in his book Italian Ways. And the conductor Antonio Pappano is here to talk about the experience of making music in Rome and making it at the Royal Opera House, where he's about to conduct a new production of Verdi's Don Carlo. We begin, though, with the director Bernardo Bertolucci, a distinguished observer of Italian history and society, who recently made his first film in Italy for many years, Io e Te, or in English, Me and You. Bernardo, first time back in Italy and making an Italian language feature film. What was it like going back?
It has been a long time since I've done a movie in Italian, I think 20 years. It started because I was working with, I had this chance to work with Marlon Brando on the last time in Paris, and I started to see how English dialogues are much better than Italian, the dialogue in English than the dialogue in Italian, in the sense that they are dry, effective, immediate, while dialogue in Italians in general very literary and quite heavy. Anyway, I am back with my little film, and it's...
You describe it as a little film. It's not a little film, it's a modestly scaled film. It couldn't be less, like a film like The Last Emperor. It's a chamber piece, really, isn't it? It almost entirely takes place in a small basement in Rome, where a young boy is hidden away for a week. Just tell us a little bit about the story of the film.
Yeah, this little boy lies to his family. He pretends to go to a skiing week, and in fact he hides in the basement. He wants his moment of happy loneliness, in a way, is what he has prepared for. He prepared a certain number of Coca-Cola, of little sandwiches, etc.
He very carefully gets 7, doesn't he, of each,
yeah,
to get him through the week.
Yeah, he's a bit, in that sense, he's a bit particular and obsessive. But then suddenly somebody comes to interrupt his holiday in the basement, and it's his half-sister. They know very little each other. They are like in 2 families which don't like each other. And she's a tossica, she's a junkie. And she also hides in the basement, like the boy. Why? Because she's trying to be cured from her...
she wants to go cold turkey, doesn't she?
She wants to cold turkey in order to meet a boyfriend, etc., etc. It's, maybe...
It's a very intimate, private little film, and I don't know whether it was because I was reading all of this other material for this programme today. I was, looking at documentaries about Italy. I couldn't prevent myself from looking at it as a kind of analogy about Italy. She is from the south, he is from the north. They find some kind of togetherness in this little basement. They're also alienated, both of them, from their parents, which I think is something which is true of a lot of young Italians now. Did you intend any of that, or am I just...
I wanted to tell the story of those 2 creatures. But in fact, if I look back, I think that there's another sense to that story, that these 2 young people hide because they can't relate to the reality around them. Maybe there is also this...
You also, I noticed, you confirmed earlier, when you look around, this basement is cluttered with the remnants of an older Italy, the leftover bric-a-brac of one of the residents in this apartment block. There's a little bust of Mussolini tucked up on the shelf there. What was that there for?
Yeah, this is what remains in the belly of these houses in the rich part of Rome, also a right-wing part of Rome called Parioli. And I thought that in the basement you have the rest of what happened 50 years earlier, and maybe ready to take it out if it's necessary, the bust of Mussolini.
Was it a good experience going back and filming there? Did it exasperate you, working in the country and the actual business of working in the country? Did you find it very different to...
No. You know, I used to travel in my work. I worked in China, I worked in Nepal, in the Sahara Desert. And now it has become the time where I can't really go very far away. But sometime even in a little Kammerspiel chamber work, you can find intensity. I haven't worked for a long time, and it was like a therapy to go back to work.
So you're going to be doing it again?
Oh, absolutely.
Antonio Pappano, I want to bring you in here. It's almost impossible, isn't it, to look at any of these Italian subjects without projecting, to a certain degree, a kind of notion of the country itself onto the culture, onto the cultural production of it.
There are so many cliches about Italy that are so sort of surface-driven. I have my relationship with Italy is relatively new. My parents are Italian, but I was born here, went to America, and since I've taken this job as music director of an Italian orchestra in Rome, I can't believe actually what the real Italy is, about the people, the melancholy, the what we call this word grinta, this tenacious stance, individualism, if you like, the absolute incapability of people to listen to one another.
Well, I got some of that sense from your film. I mean, it's wonderful the way the boy shuts himself inside his earphones. He never listens to Italian music. It's always American or English music. And he seals himself off entirely from Italy, it seems. Even the stuff he's drinking is not Italian. No, you don't agree, Tim?
Well, I think sealing oneself off from everything is what modern technology has given us, and what everybody's doing, even on the trains, as I talk about. It's become impossible to talk to people because they're on their mobiles. But when I saw this film in Milan when it came out, we have a wonderful boy acting with a simply marvellous face to look at, marvellously, obviously unhappy with the world. But remember that when he actually goes towards the coach where everybody's setting off to go to the mountains, all the other adolescents are absolutely delighted to be going on holiday to the mountains for a week. And I'm there in the cinema saying, don't go to the basement, go on holiday, have a good time. And instead, this poor boy isn't going to do that. And I don't know, perhaps because I'm seeing the film inside the world I live in Milan, I really didn't think about it in particular as a comment on Italy at all, although everything's wonderfully recognisable. Particularly the other kids setting off for the holiday, which my kids have done so often.
Annalisa Pires.
Well, I kind of share both observation by Tony and Tim. In a sense, this film could have been done 40 years ago, because there is no reference whatsoever to Italy's today. It's a kind of wonderful depiction of teenager angst that could have been done in any moment. On the other hand, though, this attitude of sealing yourself off from reality, it is something that belongs to Italians today. this is part of the message of my film, Girlfriend in a Coma, that talks about a country in a coma, because it has consistently refused to accept reality in the past 20 years. So there is a part of it, certainly. But I would like to ask Bernardo if it was intentional to avoid completely any kind of a reflection of the situation of young people today in Italy, which is a very, very dramatic situation. 1 in 3 is out of job of the youngster.
Oh yeah, it's. I think that the situation in Italy at the moment, it's a nightmare from which the country is unable to wake up. Maybe it's a coma, maybe it's a nightmare. In that coma, there is a nightmare. No, I didn't want to particularly to tell about the situation. I just took this 100 pages novella by Niccolò Amaniti. I like the relationship with the brother and sister, and it was possible to me. I'm not allowed to walk. I have no mobility. I'm on a wheelchair. So it was possible. It had the limitations. My limitations were the same of the production. So, but I think that even if you don't underline something comes out anyway. Even if I didn't talk about anything of the reality in Italy, I think it's a question of feeling. The two kids, the boy and the girl, I think are really Italian kids of today.
It's also, I mean, you have talked about the plight of young Italians, but this is it seemed to me a hopeful film. I mean, within bounds, it's ambiguous, the ending, but it seems to me hopeful that there is a possibility for.
Yes, at the end they go out. They have a kind of the light of the early morning in Via Lima in Italy, and there is a sense of liberation. The two kids are in a way liberated, and it's a bit ambiguous, as Tom says, but and it's what I've been unable to do. I am the one sitting myself. In the last years, I've been a lot at home, not being able to move around, and.
So that was a certain amount of private optimism at the end of the film.
There is the desire.
And do you feel any of that optimism about Italy?
Not really. Not really, because what you do is what you would like, but probably the country will take a long time. Because I think we maybe all forget that for 20 years we were forced to the major presence of media in Italy was Berlusconi, and the conflict of interest in which he was enormous, which in no country would have been accepted. In Italy, it was with us for all this time, and I'm afraid that a lot of the youth in Italy has been in a way anesthetized by this. Televisions and media.
Well, this is precisely what your film is about, Annalisa. I mean, you start with a long section about the failure to pass a conflict of interest law. Just tell us about the film. What was the prompt for it initially?
Well, the prompt for it was despair. Despair by me and the other author of the film, Bill Emmott, former editor of The Economist, who has written a couple of books on Italy. It was despair at the inability of Italy to see reality and be aware of how tragic the situation is. I mean, we use the metaphor of the coma because we felt that there was no sign of any nervous reflex to what was happening. I mean, what Bernardo says is true. The fact that for 20 years we have allowed a man to dominate the culture of a country and destroy it, basically, this is the original sin. And if you look at what happened last week in Italy, you would think that Italy is not in need of being awakened, but it needs to be sectioned because it was completely insane.
And there's a very nice moment early in the film. I mean, Bill Emmott, when he was editor of The Economist, had an inflammatory cover. He attacked Berlusconi on the cover. Berlusconi sued him for libel, lost. but you actually have him meeting up in a meeting room in the Quirinale, a wonderful kind of conflict.
Reality TV, a kind of reality TV that Berlusconi probably didn't like. Well, yes, it's one of the, in my view, one of the most striking part of the film, in which Bill doorsteps Berlusconi and talks to him. And what is
he doesn't get anywhere, does he? I mean, Berlusconi is just all
no,
outward
it doesn't
charm.
get anywhere. But what is interesting, though, of that little piece of a film is that Berlusconi is extremely charming, and he offers himself for an interview when Bill explains to him that he's doing a documentary on Italy. And what is interesting is that soon afterward he denied having ever said that, because he didn't know that he had been filmed, and then we had to send him the piece of film, and we just received a very anodyne answer from his spokesperson. I hope that we will deal with this as gentlemen.
Just explain, because for English listeners, your notion that Italy is on the brink of a volcano, you say, might be difficult. We only know it, as it were, as holiday makers. We see it as a kind of country of la dolce vita. It's got wonderful culture, it's got wonderful history. Why are things so bad? You run a series of economic indicators through your film, which was very shocking, I think. It places Italy constantly amongst developing countries and third world countries.
Well, those are facts, because the film uses the method, the rigorous method of investigation of The Economist, formerly run by Bill Emmott. The thing is that very few people in the world, in Europe and in Britain, have an idea of how quickly Italy has been going down, declining in the past 20 years. It has been an extraordinary decline, very, very fast. And what the film wants to do is to alert everybody in Europe, especially people who love it, like the British, who go so often on holiday there. I mean, we know that David Cameron goes to Tuscany, Tony Blair has been to Italy so many times we can't count them. So the film wanted to say, wake up, you too. If you love Italy, it's very, very important that you wake up, because what is happening there will have extraordinary consequences on Europe and on you as well.
You use Dante throughout the film. There's a kind of paradox there, isn't there? And I wondered whether you thought about that. Dante occurs at this time of great corruption. I mean, the Inferno is full of anger, full of the kind of anger in your film about the nature of Italy and the nature of political corruption. And yet you have this flourishing of art alongside it. You get it again in the Renaissance. And I wondered whether there's a kind of odd paradox there, that Italy is a country that flourishes despite its problems at all times.
Well, it flourishes in reaction to the abyss in which it plunges itself almost regularly in history, like many countries. I mean, in Britain, during the Thatcher years, we have had the flourishing of the arts. But what Dante tells is how you can be rebirthed. I mean, Dante puts the basis for Renaissance, which is the foundation of European culture, putting the emphasis again on the man and the knowledge. The most famous verses of Dante are "Made were you not to live like brutes, but to follow virtue and knowledge," is the Ulysses page, which is still incredibly vital now.
You propose both culture but also industry as one possible solution, and it comes, as it were, from the Economist stable. So you have Fiat and Nutella presented as exemplary employers and one way out. I was a little uncertain about that. Isn't that just another example of the enclosed family unit which prevents a sort of a sense of public virtue?
Well, everything has its extremes in Italy. So the family business model has been extremely successful and positive, as in the Ferrero case. And that's why we presented it, because somehow it shows you a capitalism which is interested in the long term and not in the short term greed and profit. So that was the idea. But we also present other examples of Buona Italia, of the good Italy, in the community spirit.
Yes. Tim Price.
I agree that it was a bit perplexing seeing Fiat in particular, which has been a huge receiver of government subsidies over many years and obviously deeply engaged in the corrupt nature of Italian politics.
Under new management now, though.
That stopped 20 years ago, Tim, the public subsidies. Since
the public subsidies did indeed stop 20 years ago, but the relations between Fiat and the government most certainly haven't. But anyway, that's aside. And I think that's partly the result of a problem of Italy always presenting itself and then being seen from outside in this vice and virtue polarity, which I don't think is helpful, because I think, as Annalisa's just said, we're looking at a continuum and a certain way of organising society that can very easily pan out negatively or positively. I'm living in Italy with grown-up kids, 2 of whom have had to leave because they couldn't find work there, one of whom in particular really didn't want to leave. So this whole question of what's happened to Italian youth is terribly intense right now. But if I can just say, the thing that bothered me about the film was this. It's true that we've had this total disaster of the Italian media being taken over by Berlusconi. It's true that rather than, I think, being in a coma, we have a case of a real collective vocation for denial, which is being fed by somebody who very cleverly understands that, as Saviano very precisely said in your film. But whether this is actually the consequence, whether the economic decline is a consequence of this, I very much doubt. I think the economic decline is very much tied up to Italy's relation with Europe, and the plummet really began with the entry into the euro, which put Italy in a position where it simply could not compete and go on behaving as it used to. The problem with Berlusconi
That's the catch, isn't it?
Right, and go on behaving as it used to. And the problem really is that with the media as we have it, it is very difficult to realise this.
Without the euro, it would have devaluated as it did in the past, and that was not a good thing, not for the Italian economy, not for the people who saw their salaries being devalued regularly. So I'm not sure that going back to the past and devalue the lira would have been a good thing.
Antonio Pappano, did you recognise Italy in this film? Did you recognise an Italy you know?
When I saw the first half of the film, I was almost in tears, because it was just one nail after another in the coffin. And
we should say it starts with Mala Italia, doesn't it? And
yes.
It does go on to
yes, the bad Italy. But what strikes me being in Italy is that every single person that I meet, have a conversation with, has sort of volumes to say about Italy. There's this incredible love that's deep down, but what comes out from every Italian is incredibly negative about this country. It's impossible, only in this country could this happen, only in this. I think, though, I'm in a situation where I'm dealing with a team, an orchestra, very interesting, who together can create something, a product of made in Italy, if you like. We're mostly Italians. We go on tour a lot. We are ambassadors of Italy. And together, somehow, I don't know how it's happened, but I've managed to get them listening to each other and listening to me and being almost in like a football team. That's where
you have to stage a little risorgimento every night.
Where people want to go, they want to show how good they are, and they've got a chance to do this. On tour, we have had incredible success because people somehow are... people of other cultures want to be in the presence of a certain amount of Italianità, of passion, of temperament.
But maybe it's going abroad that enables them to feel that. I want to come to you, Tim Parks, because you have this very interesting term, which I'm sure is common knowledge. I hadn't encountered it before, campanilismo, which is the Italian word for, as it were, regionalism or parochialism. And you kind of identified as a real problem in your book.
Well, a campanilismo, the campanile, obviously, is the bell tower of the church, and the competition to build the best and the tallest and the most impressive bell tower, which began in the 1200s, something like that, then became a word for localism. Localism is obviously extremely strong in Italy. We know that Italy wasn't politically united until 1860. And I live in the north of Italy, and for 30 years lived in Verona, which is pretty much the epicenter of the Northern League, which is terribly eager to concentrate all the local tax money on local expenditure and so on. It is a huge problem in Italy, but I would also say, again, it's not a vice, it's also a virtue. One of the wonderful things about Italy is they believe my town is the centre of the world, and so we'll look after my town.
You write in your book, and basically what you've done in your book is go on a long series of railway journeys on Italian trains and use that as a way of cutting through the culture and how the culture works. There's a paradox here as well, isn't it? Because you write about the railways tying Italy together, almost literally, with these steel rails, and yet at the same time facilitating everybody going home at the weekends.
Absolutely.
So that you kind of dissolve the unity.
Well, the book isn't actually a series of long travels. A lot of it is about long-range commuting, which I did 20 years of from Verona to Milan. It was about a 100-mile commute. Italians love to stay in their hometown, and so they will go away and study and come back always at the weekend. And many professors at my university come from as far away as Palermo. So it's a very constant thing in Italy. Because of that, you have to have subsidised rail prices, subsidised... And then what begins to happen then is, how long can we go on doing this and not recognising that reality requires us to put up
Well, in a way,
fares?
your book is a kind of test case of modernisation, isn't it? It looks at the railways and says, well, they brought in what looks like a modernisation, but when you look closely, it turns out they fudged it somehow.
Well, let me just say this about the book. One of the things that was lovely about writing the book is that more and more over the years, I've realised that all the contact I have with people who are completely outside my world in Italy, and above all with the immigrants who don't get mentioned in the film we've talked about, but who actually over the last 15 years have come to make up 7% of a population that is not increasing. So that's a huge influx. You only meet these people, see everything operating on the trains, and it's on the trains that everybody understands where they belong, as it were, in Italian society. So it was fascinating to unravel that and see, particularly as fast trains were introduced, how Trenitalia and in general the authorities is desperately splitting the credit card holding
Trenitalia is the new
Trenitalia is
luxurious high speed.
No, Trenitalia is the whole of the Italian train system. They're simply splitting very clearly the rich traveller, or not rich, the well-off traveller, from the traveller who will instead be used when they indicate levels of inflation. And he uses very low tickets but travels, if not in misery, close to it.
Just to precise one thing, still trains in Italy work better than in Britain and cost 5 times less.
You make that point.
Absolutely,
They
yes.
cost 5 times
I'm a lover.
less. So even if there is a distinction between the travel well-off, still they are extremely affordable.
How long can
I
they
don't
sustain them
think the
costing?
fast trains cost 5 times less, although they're probably about half as much. It depends how you travel. I do make that point very clearly, that I think a wonderful book could be written about British society through understanding how the trains work.
Well, one of the interesting and the more humorous aspects of your book is the encounters you have with Italian ticket inspectors, which allows you to explore the Italian notion of furbo. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing that right. A wonderful concept, the idea of slyness and cunning, and a kind of ambiguous respect for it and rage with it at the same time.
Well, the furbo, who's the sly guy, and the pignolo, who's the very fastidious guy, are two evident polarities available to anybody growing up in Italy. So you automatically become either a little bit pignolo, that is insisting on the rules, or a little bit furbo. And in a country where basically everybody's thinking that the rules are negotiable, and rules are basically negotiable in Italy. They're there, but they're negotiable, as we've just seen with the election of the president in Italy. And then there's the Pignolo who just insists that no, the rule is the rule, even when there maybe isn't a rule. He kind of imagines that there is. And so very often you get into quite bizarre and endless conversations with ticket inspectors.
I'm guessing you don't take the train much anymore, Antonio Pappano, or am I wrong?
I don't. My little abode is 7 minutes from the podium, so I walk literally. I don't get to see that very much, but I've got. It's funny. But by the way, about the trains. I've never taken a train in Germany that was ever on time. I just want to say that.
It's true.
So that myth goes out the window. I love the idea of everybody having an opinion, as long as there is a notion that there is a moment of decision. And it's interesting because, as a conductor, there has to be a moment where I give the soloist a certain leeway, a certain moment of time to really express himself. But at a certain point, I have to gather all these forces, all these egos, and bring them in to give them coherence. And, my God, if you watch Italian television, there was some fantastic footage of this show Porta a Porta, where all these politicians get on and talk to each other, really, truly not listening to each other and shouting at each other, shouting over each other. This happens in rehearsals too, by the way, in the orchestra. And to manage that is quite something. But I tell you, this listening thing is a real problem, because you never get to that point of, okay, now we have to decide, and this is the way it's going to be, bang. Well, they never get to that
Tony
point.
Would be a fantastic president of the Republic. I'm going to candidate him just right
now. There may be a vacancy before we get to the end of the program. You never know.
There's going to be a vacancy very soon, because the new president is 88. So.
Bernardo, what do you think about all this? You haven't said anything. Come on.
No, I think that directing a movie, it's in a way a little bit quite close to conducting an orchestra, because I have the crew as you have the orchestra, and I have to involve them completely in not only in what I want to do as interior, exterior, lights, etc., but in what I want to say, what I want to feel. And at the end of the shoot, this was for 10 years, I didn't do any movie, so I thought to be completely out of practice. But then I had two things. In one hand, for me, it was a miracle that after such a long time I was able to direct, I would say, to conduct a movie. On the other hand, it was what I've done all my life, for it was the easiest thing to do for me. There was a bit of conflict in that, but the
conflict was in you, not on your set.
No, the set was following me with a kind of affection.
When they're with you, it's an incredible thing.
Well, yes, I'm interested in what you say about arguing. Tim, you have a nice line in your book where you say, this idea that the Italians are not really a single country, which is sometimes put forward from outside. You say, the Italians are a people because their way of arguing with each other is quite different to their way of arguing with foreigners.
I mean, the whole question of Italian unity is a very tormented one. But the idea of Italy as a single entity certainly didn't start in 1860. I mean, even in writing in it, even if we just look immediately before, Leopardi is calmly writing a book called The Customs of the Italians in 1826. But when I translated Machiavelli's Prince, it's clear at the end of that book that Machiavelli is thinking about Italy as a whole. And basically, everybody was afraid that somebody would unite Italy and that would lead to the breakdown of their local power. You could see that very often they would be happier to bring a foreigner into the country in the 15th, 16th century particularly, rather than accept that one of the Italian states should begin to take over the state. So frankly,
But that's campanilismo again.
Again, it is, but it's like a dysfunctional family. You know they're a family because they argue with each other. When I wrote the book on football in Serie A and travelled to all the towns in Italy with Verona, who were not a happy bunch of fans, at least as far as the press see them. Actually, I had a whale of a time, but there's this wonderful thing that they have a special insult for every town they go to visit, and the other towns have a special insult for them. And so you could say they're disunited, but actually they know perfectly well that they really need the other people to insult them and to insult and to get energy from that. Actually, it's a lot of fun, I can assure you.
Antonio Pappano, was it easier for you to go as a quasi-outsider to run an orchestra in Rome than it would have been for a native Italian, as it were?
Probably. What was frightening to me, though, was when I stood up in front of the orchestra for the first time, I felt like I was conducting 100 versions of myself. And that, with all the pluses and minuses, I know my own weaknesses and I know my own strengths, and they mirrored them to me, and it was just frightening. And it's been very good for both of us, because I think as they've gotten better, I think I've gotten better, because I'm having to almost treat myself as I treat them. I don't want to get too holistic about all this, but it is true.
You said somewhere that you were trying to get your Italian musicians to play a little more like Germans. I don't know whether you said that to them.
No, I've never ever said that.
Oh, that was quoted in an interview.
I would
not
never
true.
ever say that. The thing is that there is no real Italian symphonic music, or very little, and therefore we're constantly having to re-identify ourselves, reinvent ourselves for each repertoire. But my strong feeling is that we must not completely give up our identity just because we're playing Beethoven or we're playing Brahms or we're playing Mahler or Schubert or Mozart. I think the Italian idea of song, and it's beautiful that the movies, Annalisa's movie starts with song. This is very important. This idea of expressing, going beyond words, and just breaking out into song is a very strong impulse. And the way Italian musicians play song is something that's very captivating and very very important to the culture. This going beyond the normal.
But
Sorry,
also
Annalisa.
going beyond rationality, which is so central to Italian culture, which is a real problem. There is no surprise that Italians invented opera or melodrama, because somehow in singing they can just raise themselves above all this tribalism and this infighting that has been there since the times of Dante, which is why I put him here in the film, because he describes that kind of impossibility of Italians to reason with themselves, which is what we have seen, last week, which is we should be at the center of the Italian culture and public debate, and it's not.
You propose culture as one possible solution. I mean, partly by analogy, but also...
Yes, but it's getting short shrift. It's getting... the money's being taken away.
Well, there's a shocking statistic in your film. More money spent on government cars than on national patrimony.
Frightening. That is frightening. That said, it's a time of opportunity. If you've got some kind of plan going forward, at least I'm just telling you what my band does. We have a combination of our live performances for our loyal public and very warm public in Rome. We go on tour. We make recordings. We do streaming. I think you have to move forward. You have to go in. Use the technology, but you do have to get out. It's very interesting. Italian people are impressed by the fact that you had a triumph in Vienna. You had 2 nights at the Musikverein, and it all went well. You conquered the Swiss public, or Germany was at on its feet.
Bernardo, I want to bring you in here. There was a time when Italian cinema had world status. Maybe not so much the case now. Do you think culture is?
I think that the greatest Italian cinema was just after the war. It was called neorealismo, and when Rossellini started to take the camera out far from the studio, far from they take it in the street, in the real life, Rossellini or De Sica or Visconti, and that was the great moment of Italian cinema. Then,
and do you think that fed back into Italian society? It clearly made a huge impression outside of Italy, and it created a picture of Italy to the outside world. Did it help Italy?
Does poetry help somebody, a country? I think that poetry and beauty are the way of save this country.
Hooray! Hooray!
Frankly, I think if Italian unity depends on culture, and particularly high culture, then God help us, because the glue that's holding together the country at the moment is inertia, continuing to live as they have. Ignavia and inertia, just on and on as we work.
Very quickly, because we're running out of time. Is it breakable? Can it come out of the coma?
Well, we are witnessing now a kind of minimum reaction of the civic society. So we just have to keep our fingers crossed, I guess.
Okay, I don't know whether that counts as optimism or pessimism.
I actually think that Italy will have to pass through a really desperate crisis before things change.
So we haven't got there yet?
No, I don't think we're anywhere near that.
Antonio?
Cautious optimism. I want it to go so right, but time will tell.
And Bernardo, you're going back to make more films?
Yes, but I don't know if my kids in the next films will be able to go out from the basement into
the light.
Into the life.
That sounds a little gloomy. Okay, well, thank you very much to all my guests. Bernardo Bertolucci's film Me and You, Io e Te, is on general release now. Annalisa Pires' film Girlfriend in a Coma is out on DVD. Antonio Pappano will be conducting Don Carlo at the Royal Opera House in London from May the 4th, and Tim Parks' Italian Ways will be published at the beginning of June. And there's more on Italy all this week on Radio 4 with Letters from Italy at 9:45. Next week, Lisa Jardine will be here to uncover art, lost and stolen, with Gavin Turk, Tanya Ronda and Rick Gikoski. And one last notice, Start the Week will be recording an edition of the programme at the Brighton Festival on Thursday the 2nd of May at midday. Details of how you can get tickets to that are on the Start the Week website. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
There's more information about Start the Week on the programme's website. Go to bbc.co.uk, where you'll also find many more Radio 4 programmes you can download for free. Thank you for listening to this download of Start the Week, presented by Tom Sutcliffe.
Hello. Italy's in crisis this morning, still without a government 2 months after the general election, and with the populist leader of the Five Star Movement, Beppe Grillo, calling on his supporters to oppose the re-election of President Napolitano. Then again, how long has it been since Italy wasn't in some kind of crisis? On the programme today, 4 guests who love the country to talk about its exasperating combination of virtue and vice. Annalisa Pires' documentary, Girlfriend in a Coma, is explicitly intended as a wake-up call, alerting anyone who cares to just how critical the country's condition now is. The British writer Tim Parks, who's lived in Italy for years, takes to the rails to get at the national character in his book Italian Ways. And the conductor Antonio Pappano is here to talk about the experience of making music in Rome and making it at the Royal Opera House, where he's about to conduct a new production of Verdi's Don Carlo. We begin, though, with the director Bernardo Bertolucci, a distinguished observer of Italian history and society, who recently made his first film in Italy for many years, Io e Te, or in English, Me and You. Bernardo, first time back in Italy and making an Italian language feature film. What was it like going back?
It has been a long time since I've done a movie in Italian, I think 20 years. It started because I was working with, I had this chance to work with Marlon Brando the last time in Paris, and I started to see how English dialogues are much better than Italian, the dialogue in English than the dialogue in Italian, in the sense that they are dry, effective, immediate, while dialogue in Italians in general very literary. and quite heavy. Anyway, I'm back with my little film, and it's...
You describe it as a little film. It's not a little film, it's a modestly scaled film. It couldn't be less, like a film like The Last Emperor. It's a chamber piece, really, isn't it? It almost entirely takes place in a small basement in Rome, where a young boy is hidden away for a week. Just tell us a little bit about the story of the film.
Yeah, this little boy lies to his family. He pretends to go to a skiing week, and in fact he hides in the basement. He wants his moment of happy loneliness, in a way, is what he has prepared for. He prepared a certain number of Coca-Cola, of little sandwiches, etc.
He very carefully gets 7, doesn't he, of each,
Yeah,
to get him through the week.
Yeah, he's a bit, in that sense, he's a bit particular and obsessive. But then suddenly somebody comes to interrupt his holiday in the basement, and it's his half-sister. They know very little each other. They are like in two families which don't like each other. And she's a tossica, she's a junkie. And she also hides in the basement. There's also this...
You also, I noticed, you confirmed earlier, when you look around, this basement is cluttered with the remnants of an older Italy, the leftover bric-a-brac of one of the residents in this apartment block. There's a little bust of Mussolini tucked up on the shelf there. What was that there for?
Yeah, this is what remains in the belly of these houses in the rich part of Rome, also a right-wing part of Rome called Parioli. And I thought that in the basement you have the rest of what happened 50 years earlier, and maybe ready to take it out if it's necessary, the bust of Mussolini.
Was it a good experience going back and filming there? Did it exasperate you, working in the country and the actual business of working in the country? Did you find it very different to...
No. I used to travel in my work. I worked in China, I worked in Nepal, in the Sahara Desert. And now it has become the time where I can't really go very far away, like the boy. Why? Because she's trying to be cured from her...
she wants to go cold turkey, doesn't she?
She wants cold turkey in order to meet a boyfriend, etc., etc. It's maybe...
It's a very intimate, private little film, and I don't know whether it was because I was reading all of this other material for this programme today. I was, looking at documentaries about Italy. I couldn't prevent myself from looking at it as a kind of analogy about Italy. She is from the south, he is from the north. They find some kind of togetherness in this little basement. They're also alienated, both of them, from their parents, which I think is something which is true of a lot of young Italians now. Did you intend any of that, or am I just...
I wanted to tell the story of those two creatures. But in fact, if I look back, I think that there's another sense to that story, that these two young people hide because they can't relate to the reality around them. Maybe they